Hello everybody, this is Anthony Arroyo from the AbletonCookbook.com, and today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how to use the grain delay. And this is an effect that I don't use a lot, but I definitely think it's important to understand what it does, at least, so you don't have it just sitting there taking up space. So the grain delay, let's just go ahead and start by running through some of the parameters here. So as you can see on this track, I have this instance of the August synthesizer by Katsuhiro Chiba as one of the free Max for Live devices that they're giving away at the Ableton website, ableton.com. And you'll see that I have basically just solo the bass line. I have a pretty simple bass line going on in terms of the actual sonics of it. So not like a lot of harmonics. It's a pretty pure sound. There's not a lot of harmonics in the upper regions. So the problem is like this is going to get stepped on probably in the mix because there's not a lot up in the higher harmonics that will cut through the mix. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to show you how the different parameters of the grain delay will affect the sound on this. So what is a grain delay? A grain delay is an effect that essentially cuts up the sound into little chunks that are called grains, and then it delays each chunk by a little bit. So this is similar to granular synthesis. It's the same idea where you cut a sound into very tiny parts and you kind of spray them out. And so there's a whole bunch of different effects, as you can see. And let's go through them. So the first, and what's cool about this effect in particular, and what makes it look different, is that it has this XY controller. And what's cool about the XY controller is that you can actually assign any one of these parameters to the XY controller simply by selecting them. So let's say I want to control pitch and delay time at the same on the X and the Y. So right now the pitch would be on the Y-axis and delay time would be on the X-axis. Same thing, so if I want to do pitch on the X-axis and spray on the Y-axis, I could do that as well. So and so forth. So what do these parameters do? So let's start with the most obvious one. So what we said was the grain delay is going to cut up the frequency into little pieces, the sample into little pieces. And what controls the size of those pieces is the frequency. And the reason that it's frequency and not milliseconds is that basically this is going to be the cycle at which it cuts it up. So you can hear as it gets bigger, the chunks get bigger. As it gets smaller, the chunks get a little bit smaller as well. So another thing that the grain delay is able to do is affect the pitch. So when it cuts these little grains up, it can also shift the pitch up. So I usually like to keep it at either 0 or at 12, which is going to be an octave. The reason I do that is that it's not too, that way you don't have the stuff doesn't sound too spacey. A lot of these effects, or these parameters rather, if you really jack them up, you're going to get some really bizarre sounds. It's going to sound very metallic because it's basically going to kind of obliterate the fundamentals of the tone. So you won't be able to actually even tell what note is being played, which is why this is very useful a lot of times if you're trying to make a percussive sound or you're trying to affect a percussive sound. That kind of doesn't matter about the pitch. So that's frequency, that's pitch. Random pitch, this is going to basically apply a certain amount of randomization to the pitch shifting. So even though in this case, let's say I have it set at 12 semitones up, that means it's gonna pitch everything up an octave. If I apply some randomness to the pitch, it's going to shift it a little bit. So it's not always going to be exactly an octave. So you can So there's going to be a little bit of wiggle in there when it randomizes the pitch. Feedback, so a lot of these controls also are very similar just to delay in general, because it is still a delay. So the feedback, once again, is going to be how much of the signal is fed back into the delay. What that functionally means is basically how long the delay goes on. Dry wet, relatively simple. This is the amount of the effect that is actually on the signal. So now the original signal is totally gone. Now the effect is off. Right? And these let's see, that's interesting. And these down here are similar to the simple delay in that basically, and all the delay effects on Ableton Live. And what these do is these cut the subdivisions for the delay. So it's going to basically, it's going to determine how long the signal at what interval the signal will be repeated, if that makes any sense. And so sync mode is going to be in time with the music, and then time is going to be just dictated by milliseconds. So as you can see, this stuff is can make things very noisy. So let's see. So now the effect is totally off, but let's say I turn it entirely on. So like I said, you can take it pretty far out there and get some pretty crazy squelchy type stuff. That if you can see that you jack up the feedback a little bit, and then it'll just sort of go on forever. And that's really useful a lot of times if you're want to make kind of like a swarming, noisy type sound. And what's cool is if you just do it with dry and wet, you can sort of bring it in and out. Useful if you want to really add some complexity to a pad or something. But what I'm doing right now is I found that this is a good way to add a little bit of harmonic complexity to a bass line. And so I know that this is something that I do a lot in my music, and I'm sure that other people do it as well, is sometimes if you want to add like a little variation between two sections, but you don't want to change the chords and you don't really want to add any more instrumentation, what you can do is double the bass line, and that will make the bass line come to the front of the mix as more of a sort of an obvious part of the song. So a lot of times I'll just double the bass line, and I do that in sort of like a very basic way. I do that usually in a pretty elementary way, where I literally have two tracks, with the one with the bass line pitched up and the other one with the bass line pitched down, and I delay the octave up one, maybe 2 octaves up, and then it'll just double the bass line. But what you could do is use the grain delay as a very simple and kind of crude and not really totally functional pitch shifter. But the thing is like because it doesn't exactly shift the pitch exactly, it does add a little bit of variation, which is really cool, I think. So you can take a bass line, kind of what we have right now, and let's just turn all this stuff down here. Oh, I forgot to say, Spray, what Spray does is randomize. So random pitch is going to randomize the pitch shifting, and Spray is going to randomize the delay time. So it's going to sort of add another level of variation in there. So what you can do, so let's take this all down. So if I want to, so you can see it's already, even though I have all these things down, it's still cutting up the frequency at about 1 hertz, and which is pretty small. So the longer this hertz gets, the more sort of robotic it sounds. So the smaller it is, the more it's going to sound just like a chorus. And so what I can do is I can have this hertz, the frequency pretty small, and it's going to basically sound like a little chorus, and randomize the pitch a little bit. And that's something that I like to do, and that way I can add a little variation to the bass line without doing things entirely, having an entire double bass line. So can see that when you turn the grain delay on, it's going to add a little bit of variation and probably won't even be totally that that noticeable in the mix, but it will bring the bass line forward a little bit in the mix. So I wouldn't do this if you're after the drop or anything that you want to do really elaborately, but maybe if you have a section going on for like 16 bars, and you might want to change the bass line a little bit in the middle, and instead of changing the actual notes of the bass line, you can just add a grain delay effect. That's going to add not only the pitch up, so, but also add a little bit of movement in and a little bit of sort of rhythmic variation. And also, if you mess with the frequency and with the wet dry, let's just do it this way, frequency and wet dry, you can actually get this sort of robotic sound. So what you can do, and this is what I like to do actually, is I put the wet, dry, and the frequency on the XY controller, and that way what I can do is sort of turn the frequency up and turn the wet, dry level up at the end of the phrases. And mess around with that and record that into the thing. Anyway, so hopefully that gives you an idea of what the grain delay does and about how I certainly use it. I'm certain that there's better ways to use it, put it to a little bit more obvious use. But if you have any suggestions, go ahead and drop me a line either on the website or on the Twitter. Okay? Have a good day. This is Anthony Rowe at the AbletonCookbook.com.